So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today I'm going to cover one that I've wanted to cover for quite a while, and I don't know why I haven't gotten around to it yet. Requests and things from you guys and from channel members and just odd requests seem to take priority these days. And I went back to a case that I don't think I've really been requested too much, but I personally want to cover, so I hope you guys don't mind this one. But I think that this one's super important to cover just because of a lot of the topics that I'm going to talk about in this video. There's a lot of hard-hitting topics to do with gender, sexuality, how you want to present yourself, and maybe not being accepted by everyone for those reasons. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a warning in the beginning of this video. If any of that is super sensitive to you and you don't want to hear about it, and you know it might put you in a bad headspace, then I don't want you to watch it. Please come back for another one. Look after yourself. By the way, this video is also a two-parter. Two-parters in a row. This actually wasn't my intention, but as I started researching this case, I found that it was really long. I didn't expect this to be a long one, but it is. So a two-parter. I promise I won't take too long uploading part 2 this time. Sorry about that one. Yeah, part 2 will be out in the next few days, and this is part 1. So let's go. Before we get into this video, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, Tennis Clash. Tennis Clash is a super fun, free PvP game where, you guessed it, you can play tennis. You can play live 1v1 tennis matches against real live players elsewhere in the world in some of the world's most famous tennis arenas. And you can download the game for free by using the link down below in the description of this video. It has some really cool RPG elements to it, high-end graphics, and a 4.7 star rating on the iTunes App Store, which speaks for itself, in my opinion. The game matches you up super fast with someone on your same difficulty level, so it's not going to be too hard, and then you're off. All you have to do is swipe your finger in the direction that you want to send the ball. The speed of your swipe determines how far and fast the ball will go. And to move your player, you just tap where you want them to go. This bit's important because you need to predict where your opponent is going to hit the ball in order to get there in time. You can play with a bunch of different characters and get a cool battle pass to get you extra rewards for faster progression in the game. So if you want to download Tennis Clash, you can do so for free by using the link down below in the description of this video. And if you do, you'll receive a welcome bonus of 2,000 gems and 500 gold. You're welcome. Now, before we get into this case, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. And again, just before I get into it, I just want to give a little warning that this case does involve themes of homophobia, hate crimes against gender, different genders. So, you know, if that's something that you don't want to watch, please do click out right now. So the Johnson family were a family of 4, originally from Chicago. It was a single mother named Katrina and her 3 children, 2 boys and a girl named Cedric, Kadari and Nija. Now, the Johnson family were pretty hard up for money. Of course, a single mother's wage to cover not only her own food and shelter, but 3 children as well. They were struggling for money. And a lot of the time they were bouncing between homeless shelters. They couldn't afford essentials a lot of the time. Of course, Chicago as well is known for relatively high crime rates, and Katrina always knew that she wanted a better life for her children. She really wanted to move away and raise them in a much nicer place with a lot more money, but she couldn't do that. She couldn't afford to leave Chicago. They were a really close family. The siblings, as they grew older, they were like best friends, not just siblings. They wouldn't have many fights, but when they did, they would recover from them very quickly. They were all just super loving, super supportive of each other, all 4 of them. They were just such a close-knit, just a nice family, a really nice, heartwarming family to read about. They were all each other's priorities, and their family values were just so strong. It was family over everything else. They would literally do anything for each other. And an example of this is a story that the oldest sibling, Cedric, told about his younger brother, Kadari. One time when they were quite young, Cedric actually stole a chocolate bar from the local shop, and he got caught doing so. And there just so happened to be a policewoman in that shop, and when Cedric got caught stealing this chocolate bar, he ran out and this policewoman started chasing after him. He was running all the way home. He arrived home and he was out of breath. He was panicked. And so Katrina's saying, "What's wrong? What's happened?" And Cedric said to his mother, "They're trying to say that I stole the chocolate bar, but it wasn't me, it was Kadari." Kadari wasn't even there at the time, but Cedric was just blaming his younger brother so that he wouldn't get into trouble. And this is just one of those things that kids do. They're scared of getting in trouble, so they'll try and push the blame on someone else. And Kadari, when he got home later that day, he got the punishment for stealing this chocolate bar. He was made to stand against the wall and just look at the wall. He wasn't allowed entertainment or anything for a couple of hours as his form of punishment for stealing. And Kadari just took it. He just took the fall for Cedric. He just had this punishment. He didn't talk back. He didn't try and defend himself and say, "No, Cedric's lying." He loved his brother. He didn't want his brother to get punished, and he was happy to take that punishment for his brother. And at one point, Kadari was, facing this wall, just eating a bag of crisps, and Cedric approaches him, and Kadari actually offered Cedric, the boy that had lied and got him into this situation, into this punishment, Kadari just offered him some of his crisps because he wasn't holding a grudge. And I think that says a lot about what this family was like. They were all like that. It wasn't just Kadari. They were all just so nice to each other, He wasn't angry at Cedric. He was completely willing to do this for him, and he was still willing to share his things, even though his brother had gotten him into this. So let's talk a little bit about Kadari. So his full name was Kadari Pierre Johnson. He was born July 5th, 1999. He was the middle child, and Kadari had a very loud and proud air about him. He was a huge character. He was a performer. He liked the attention on him, not in an attention-seeking way, but just, he liked to make people laugh. He liked to socialise, and he was just himself, unapologetically himself. He wouldn't change himself for anyone. Now, from a very young age, Kadari Johnson knew that he was gay, and he had no hesitation with coming out because he knew that his family would accept him no matter what his sexuality was. So he was probably one of the only children, if not the only child, in his year group in school that was openly gay. And this was met with mixed reactions. Of course, this was almost breaking into 2010 at this point, and, people's views were still questionable. Of course, his family supported him no matter what, but some of the kids at school didn't quite understand different sexualities yet. Some of them weren't accepting of it, and this was met with a lot of teasing, which eventually led to just full-on bullying. Kadari was called names and slurs, which eventually actually led to physical violence, physical bullying. One day, his mother remembers Kadari arriving home from school, and his mouth was just full of blood, and he was all quiet. He didn't want to talk. He seemed traumatized. And it turned out that Kadari actually had a crush on a boy at school, and this boy turned out to be straight. And not only straight, he was also homophobic. And Kadari had told his friends that he had a crush on this boy, and these friends, who weren't really his friends, they went and told this boy that Kadari had these feelings for him. And this boy, instead of being flattered and politely rejecting Kadari, he decided that he was going to react differently. And this horrible boy went and found Kadari after school, and he approached him from behind. So Kadari had no idea that any of this was about to happen. He had no chance to defend himself. This boy just walks straight over and punches Kadari straight in the face, breaking his jaw. And as soon as Katrina saw her middle child coming home crying, floods of tears, his mouth full of blood, she knew that she had to do something. She didn't want to stay in Chicago any longer. She didn't really have the money to take them elsewhere, but she wasn't willing to stay in a place that was violent towards her children, for simply being themselves. She didn't quite have the money, but they were going to make it work. And with that, they just upped and left, which, again, I think says a lot about this amazing family, is that they were all just willing to leave their lives in Chicago, leave everything they knew, their friends, the mother's job, and they were all just willing to go to a completely different state and start over. All it took was this one incident for them to say, right, that's enough, we're going somewhere else. And so the Johnsons moved to a town called Burlington in the state of Iowa. Now, Burlington was a lot smaller, a lot calmer than Chicago. It was a predominantly white town. It was very conservative. On the whole, the Johnson family felt better there. Cedric even said, like, as soon as they arrived, when he was going to the supermarkets and to the shops and things, everyone around him was smiling at him. And this was something he hadn't really experienced in Chicago, because Chicago is such a busy place. It's very much like London. If you're in England, no one smiles at you in London, but then as soon as you go up north, Leeds is just smiles all around. And Cedric felt like on his first day in Burlington, he already felt like he was at home. And within just a couple of weeks of being in this new environment, Kadari began to blossom again. He was his old, confident, jokey, outgoing, loud and proud self again. And he started dancing again, which was actually one of his hobbies that he had ages ago that he'd kind of pushed to the side. As his confidence was lowering through this bullying at school, he was no longer interested in all of his hobbies, and he began picking up dancing again, singing again. He used to go to this place called the Maple Leaf Centre to have like dance classes or dance rehearsals or something like that, and he was becoming Kadari again. And best of all, he was once again unapologetically himself. And that was one of the values that Kadari held closest to his character, was that he was never going to change for anyone. And that was the first advice that he would give to anyone, is to not change yourself for anyone and be yourself. At his new school, he was making a ton of new friends, and the teachers recall Kadari being literally one of the biggest characters in the school. It was like everyone knew who Kadari was, whether that was because he was singing and dancing down the corridors, whether he was cracking jokes and making everyone in the class laugh. He was known for being a little bit of trouble in school, not, bad kind of trouble, but more in the way that he was doing pranks all the time and talking in the middle of class when he shouldn't have been, just because he was such a social, such a bubbly person. The teachers always had to move him away from his friends and split them up so that they weren't making noise over the whole class. But the teachers did love him when he wasn't getting in the way of their teaching, because he just had this positive vibe about him. They said that Kadari would make all of the other students happy just by being there, just by bringing his positive vibe to the classroom. But as with every single person on this earth, not everyone is gonna like you. And still, even in this new school in Iowa, the bullying was still there. People didn't agree with who Kadari was. Not that there's anything to agree with, it's none of their business really. He was still teased and bullied for his sexuality, how he presented himself, but it was nowhere near as severe and intense as it was in Chicago. I don't want to say as bad, because bullying, full stop, is horrific, but it was hard for Kadari to deal with. But especially at this point in his life, now that he was gaining his confidence back, he wasn't scared to talk back to the bullies now. He would defend himself this time around. If they made digs at him, he would make digs at them right back. He was known to have a slick mouth. So yeah, the bullying was still there, but he didn't let it, intimidate him the way that he used to when he was a child. But at least in this school in Iowa, he finally had a group of friends, a big group of friends as well, that were supportive and caring, and they watched him evolve as a person over the years. And this included Kadari experimenting with his gender identity. He began wearing t-shirts with the collar kind of around his head here, so that the t-shirt was going down behind his back, so it was flowing down his back, kind of like long hair. This eventually progressed into him growing his hair out a little bit. He got braids. He would sometimes wear them flowing down his back, just like he would with the t-shirt, or he was now experimenting with different updos and ways of wearing his hair. He also began experimenting with other parts of his appearance. So he would paint his nails. He bought a few different makeup products to try. He started wearing more feminine type clothes, crop tops. And it was around this time that Kadari discovered the term gender fluid. And it was as if everything just fell into place for him. He was never the kind of person that was desperately trying to label himself. He was very happy just being Kadari. When people would ask him, like, so what are you? Are you a girl? Are you a boy? I'm Kadari. But on discovering this term, gender fluid, he felt this enormous feeling of peace, knowing that there were so many other people that felt the way that he did, and that he wasn't weird or different, you know. There were a whole load of people out there just like him, and there was a word for it. So in his mid-teens, I would say around 14, 15, I think, he decided to come out to his family as gender fluid. He told them that some days he wakes up and he feels more comfortable being a little bit more masculine, whether that's wearing more masculine type clothes, you know, the pants and the jumpers, and being referred to as he or him. And then he said that other days he'll wake up and feel a lot more comfortable being a bit more feminine, and on those days he'll wear, you know, skirts or crop tops, headbands, he'll paint his nails, and on those days he wants to be referred to as she or her. It was very much dependent on the day for Kadari. He was more often than not he, him, Kadari. But, you know, some days he would wake up and want to be a little bit more feminine and want to be referred to as such. Now, every single one of the documentaries and news reports that I read relating to this case did refer to him as he, him. All the family interviews that I watched, all of his friends, he was always Kadari, he, him. So that is why this video is done the way that it is. I feel like if his family and friends have okayed all the documentaries to be referring to him as he and him, then, you know, that's what the Eleanor Neale channel will do as well. Now, I just want to clarify for people that might be slightly less educated on all these different gender terms, that Kadari wasn't transgender. He didn't want to be a female. He didn't feel like he was in the wrong body. Gender fluidity simply means that he was fluid between genders. Think about how the word fluid kind of makes you feel. It's flowing, you know? It can go between one gender and then the other. And Kadari would express his gender based on the day. So if he woke up one morning and he felt a little bit more on the masculine side of his spectrum, then he would be a little bit more masculine that day. If he woke up and he felt a lot more feminine, he would paint his nails, put his hair up, you know, whatever. Gender fluid is also not the same thing as non-binary, which often means, not all the time, means that the non-binary person doesn't want to go either by he, him, or she, her. They don't want to be in the binary. They feel much more comfortable just being them. They want to be they, them. They feel like they don't identify with either of the binary genders, whereas that's where gender fluid is different. They feel like they identify with both at different times. Also remember that everyone is different when it comes to gender terms and identities. Just because I've said that, you know, one gender term is this way in this video doesn't mean that every gender fluid person that you meet is going to be the same as Kadari. It doesn't mean that every non-binary person you meet is going to be the same as what I just described. Some non-binary people prefer to be like she, they, or he, they, or, you know, that's not what we're really talking about right now. But I just don't want anyone to come away from this video and have a very concrete thing in their mind of what a non-binary person is or what a gender fluid person is. Every human in this world is unique, and that also means that every human in this world's gender identity and expression is also unique. But I felt like, sorry this has been a really long lesson on these terms, but I felt like it was important, just in case some people didn't understand, that before we continue with this video, you maybe learn a couple of terms. So like I said, Kadari would wake up some days and feel a whole lot more feminine, even to the point where he doesn't even want to go by the name Kadari anymore, because Kadari was his birth name that he's had since a child. It's always been his boy name, and sometimes he would want a lot more feminine name, and that is where we introduce Candice. Candice was Kadari's she-her persona for the days when she just wanted to be referred to as a girl's name. That's where I was going. There were two different Facebook pages as well for both Kadari and for Candice, so, you know, he could pick Kadari if he was feeling a bit more masculine that day, and he could pick Candice if he was feeling a little bit more feminine. I'm really sincerely hoping that masculine and feminine are the correct words to be using in this instance. I'm so sorry if they're not, but that was the easiest way that I could find to put it without being like boy, girl, you know what I mean? If not, feel free to correct me in the comments. Now, when Kadari came out to his family that he was gender fluid, and sometimes he wanted to be referred to as she, and sometimes he wanted to be referred to as he, his sister Naija was really happy. She was excited to hear about Candice. Nyjah felt like Candice was the sister that she never had. Nyjah had grown up with 2 older brothers. And now she finally had Candice, who wanted to play with the dolls with her. She wanted to play with all the girly toys that Kadari had never grown up with. Kadari Johnson was 16 years old. He had a very typical teenage life. He was very happy. He had a lot of friends. But then March 2nd, 2016 came along. Just before midnight that night, a particular neighbourhood in Burlington was awoken from their sleep to 3 gunshots. Now, this didn't really happen in Burlington. So people were understandably very panicked. A lot of people in that neighbourhood woke up and dialed 911, and they reported these gunshots that they heard. And due to this sudden influx in reports, I believe police had about 6, 7, 8 calls, all reporting these same gunshots. So a few patrol officers were dispatched to that neighbourhood to go and see what was going on, to see what these gunshots actually were. At one point, these 2 officers were walking past this dark alleyway in this neighbourhood, and one of them took a look down and saw something laying in a patch of grass on the side of this alley. So these officers went over to check this out, and as they were approaching, they noticed the unmistakable, strong scent of bleach. And as they got over there, they noticed that what was laying on the floor was quite clearly a human body. And this human body had a black trash bag over their head and tied around their neck. Now, police immediately sensed the severity of this scene, and so they stepped back, they tried not to touch anything, and immediately they called forensics to the scene. Now, when they arrive, one of the first things that the crime scene investigators notice is that this black trash bag over this victim's head seemed to have scratch marks in it, as if they were trying to claw their way out of it. And from this, we know that this trash bag was placed there when the victim was still alive. They were suffocating inside of this trash bag. It was one of those trash bags that has the drawstrings, you know, that you can pull and then tie so it tightens the top of the bag. And that was exactly what had been done on this victim. These drawstrings had been pulled and tied, so not only was it suffocating the victim, it was also strangling them around their neck. It was pulled super tight. So forensics removed this trash bag from the victim's head, and when they did, they noticed that there was something inside their mouth as well. Later in the autopsy, this thing in the victim's mouth was found to be another trash bag that was balled up and used as a gag. There was also a shirt tied around the victim's lower half of their face on their jaw, probably to keep this trash bag inside of their mouth and work as a gag. Now, when that first trash bag, the one that was over the victim's head, was removed, police at the scene were able to identify this body straight away because they knew who that was. It was 16-year-old Kadari Johnson. Like I said, in this neighbourhood, Kadari was a huge character. He was very well known, even to the police. Not because he'd committed crimes in the past, but because of how he identified and how he expressed himself. He was a unique character in that town. No one else was like Kadari Johnson, and everyone knew who he was. He was an unforgettable character. If you see Kadari once in town, you're going to remember him the next time that you see him. So anyway, going back to the forensics, now that this body was identified, Kadari's shirt seemed to have been kind of rolled up all the way up to here, all the way up to his neck. And at first, this was believed to have been because his body was dragged to where it was in that patch of grass. If he was dragged across the floor, it only makes sense that his shirt would ride up like that. However, this was exposing his bra, and some sources also say that his pants were pulled down slightly, exposing his genitals as well. Now, both of these together make his top rolling up seem like less of a accident from when he was dragged. Whether this was to intentionally humiliate Kadari, or whether this was some form of sexual assault. We'll get more into that later on in the case. But he was also found without his shoes, and his shoes weren't anywhere near the body either. It seemed as though they'd been physically taken away rather than just pushed to the side or left near the scene. Now, because his top was rolled up all the way to his neck, that allowed the forensics team to be able to see his chest, and this exposed at least one gunshot wound in his chest. And later in his autopsy, this would turn out to be one of 3. Khodari was shot 3 times in the general torso area. There was also an empty bottle of bleach laying between his legs. It seemed as though his killer had poured the contents of this bleach bottle all over Khodari's body. That was where the stench of bleach was coming from. And then when the bottle had finished, it seemed as though the killer had just thrown it on top of his body, and that was just where it landed. Now, because of this exact reason, all of this bleach all over the crime scene, no DNA evidence or anything like that could be extracted from the scene. And that's how we don't know still to this day if Khodari Johnson was sexually assaulted when he was killed, because any evidence of that was removed with the bleach. However, this piece of information does tell us something about the murder and how it was carried out, because think about it, not everyone just carries around a bottle of bleach when they're going about their daily routine. So that tells us that this murder was not a spur of the moment, spontaneous crime. The killer had premeditated this, planned it, and planned how they were going to cover it up as well, and intentionally brought out a bottle of bleach with them when they killed Khodari. And one of the documentaries that I watched as part of my research on this case actually went down to the crime scene almost 4 years later, and to this day there are still stains on the ground in the gravel where that bleach was poured on Khodari. The ground is physically bleached as a constant reminder of what went on in that alleyway. Some of Khodari's hair was also found just on the ground. It had been physically pulled from his scalp. It seemed as though Khodari hadn't just been murdered on this day. He was tortured. He was gagged. He was beaten. He was partially suffocated and strangulated by this trash bag. He was doused in bleach, and then he was shot to death. And now police were given the difficult task of informing Khodari's family that he had been found murdered. In the early hours of the next morning, they went down to Khodari's house, and it was his mother, Katrina, that answered the door. The police simply asked her, "Can you tell us what your son Khodari was wearing yesterday when he left the house?" And Katrina actually happened to have a picture of Khodari from the day before, and so she showed them that. And as soon as they saw that picture, they sat Katrina down and they broke the news to her. And I'm sure you can imagine how she reacted. She just completely broke down. This was a mother that was so close with her children. They meant the whole entire world to her. She would do anything for those children, including rerouting the whole family and paying for them to move to a whole new state and make a whole new life just for Khodari's safety. And now she's learning that even that wasn't enough, and he was still in danger of these horrific, violent attacks that they desperately tried to escape. That morning, the news of Khodari's murder somehow seeped into his school. People were speculating all morning. The rumours were whispered throughout the corridors, and everyone was saying, "No, surely not. Like, he can't be." And then eventually, halfway through the day, the school got the all clear from the police that Khodari's family had all been informed, and now the school could start informing his friends. So they pulled his main close friend group into the counsellor's office and told them privately and separately. And then after that, they made an announcement over the tannoys just to confirm all the speculation. And as soon as that announcement was made, the counsellor remembered walking through the hallways and everyone was crying. Everyone was hugging. Everyone was trying to support each other as much as they could. Everyone was so affected by the loss of Khodari Johnson. Khodari had an effect on so many people. So many people loved and treasured him, and when he passed, everyone in the whole school, everyone that had known Kadari, felt that loss in some way or another. And for that exact reason, Kadari's family, when it came to hosting his funeral, they actually had to change the venue from, you know, a church, a normal place where you would have a funeral, to the school gymnasium due to the amount of people that they were expecting to have there. The whole school was going to come. He had such a huge family. Everyone wanted to be there to pay their respects to Kadari Johnson. And the turnout at this funeral was breaking into the thousands. So many people wanted to go and pay their respects to Kadari, and it was such a lovely service. And towards the end of this funeral, as I've said so many times in this video, Kadari was such a happy, positive, bubbly person, and his family wanted to honour that. They didn't want to sit around and have this super sad funeral. They wanted to do it how Kadari would have wanted it. And that was everyone singing, everyone dancing, everyone having a good time. And so for one of the last songs of the service, all of his closest friends and closest family, they all got up, went to the front of the room where the casket was laying, and they all danced and they all sang and they all hugged each other. They all celebrated. The whole gymnasium was clapping along to the song, and it was how Kadari would have wanted it. So anyway, now the police are looking at this horrifically brutal attack, and they're trying to figure out what the possible motive could be. This killing seemed very personal. It wasn't characteristic with a robbery or some kind of spontaneous killing. I mean, the killers had physically taken the time to gag Kadari, beat him, tie a bag over his head, drag him into a patch of grass. This seemed like it was a very personal, very angry matter from the killer. But who could hold so much anger for such a loved person in the town? Kadari had no known enemies. No one really disliked him enough to do this. Naturally, the thought arose that maybe Kadari was attacked and killed because of the way that he identifies and the way that he chooses to express himself. He was gay, he was gender fluid, and still to this day, hundreds of people are killed every single year simply for how they identify and for people not accepting them for who they are. And they brought this up with Kadari's family, who agreed that this was a possible motive. And police said, well, if he's bullied in school or was bullied in school, which Kadari was, could it have possibly been any of those people that have shown some kind of anger towards him in the past simply for how he identifies? The kids that call him slurs, or the kids that have pushed him about in the corridor, or that kid that punched him. But Cedric, Kadari's older brother, said, yeah, my brother was bullied, but he struggled to believe that any of those kids that had bullied him in the past would do something like this. They were classroom bullies. They weren't murderers. So his family tried to help police formulate a timeline of events. What was Kadari doing on the last day of his life? Where had he been? Who had he met up with? However, before we get into that, before we get into the timeline of events, police actually already had their first lead. A couple of the houses around where this murder actually took place, around this alleyway. Now, this wasn't actually close to Kadari's home, which is another thing that confused the police. How had Kadari ended up there? That was another reason why they were going to have to figure out the timeline of events. What brought him to that particular neighbourhood? But anyway, the people in that neighbourhood had told police that they had noticed a blue van parked in that exact alleyway where Kadari was later murdered, and none of them recognised this blue van. It was the kind of neighbourhood that you don't drive through unless you live there. It doesn't lead to anything, so neighbours, if they see a car that they don't recognise, basically random cars don't go up there very often, and this one seemed very unexplained. They had no idea who was in this blue van, and it was very suspicious timing. So a lot of them reported it to the police. And somehow police were able to identify the driver of this blue van. It was a teenage boy. So they went and spoke with this teenage boy, and it turns out he actually had an innocent explanation as to why he was parked there. He said that his girlfriend lived in that neighbourhood and he didn't really want to park his van on her drive, so he just parked it around the corner on this alleyway, and then he walked to her house, and then they went out in her car. It turns out that the couple were actually home before the murder took place, so this boy went and got in his van before Kadari even got there, before Kadari was killed, and this boy was gone. So the van was not connected to the murder. Those two suspects ruled out. Also, neither of them knew anything about Kadari's case. They didn't even really know Kadari. To be fair, I don't think they went to the same school, but yeah, they couldn't help in the case. So as for the timeline of events on March the 2nd, 2016, so that morning, Kadari Johnson had actually been suspended from school. Kadari had been up to his usual pranks that day at school, and one of them didn't land so well. He'd actually been throwing this hair pick, this comb, up into the air, and it hit another student by accident. However, this other student didn't really like it. Maybe he'd caught them on a bad day and they just didn't find it funny, and this student started a fight with Kadari. And of course, Kadari wasn't the type to just take it, so Kadari fought back, and the two of them ended up being sent to the principal's office, and both of them were suspended. So they weren't allowed to come to school for a few days. So Kadari called his mum and told her the situation, and he said, well, I've been given a load of work to do over the next few days. He wasn't just going to have a few days off school. They'd given him some work to do. And he said that he was going to go to the local supermarket to use their free Wi-Fi and do his homework there. And she said, okay, but don't be home too late. So this was a start for police. They had a location where Kadari had been that night before the murder. So they went to this supermarket and they asked if they could have the CCTV footage from the night that Kadari was killed. And sure enough, they see him on the supermarket footage. He seems completely happy. He's just walking around the supermarket. He's in the exact same clothes that his body was actually found in that evening. He then leaves the supermarket around 10 p.m. and makes a call to his mother outside in the doorway, which is also caught on CCTV. In this phone call, Katrina tells Kadari to get home because it was getting late. It was like 10 o'clock. But following that phone call, Kadari didn't actually go home. We see him leaving the supermarket and walking in the opposite direction of his house. CCTV in the parking lot catches him walking away, and this was around 2 hours before the murder. So he's going to another location, and police were going to have to find out where this was. So they spoke to a bunch of his friends, tried to figure out where he could possibly be, and that was when one of them said, oh, Kadari came to my house that night. So this girl who Kadari had seen that night at her house, her name was Amari, and the two of them would often trade clothes. So Kadari at this point actually wanted to borrow a bra from Amari because he didn't have any. So she said, right, okay, come to my house when you're done with your homework and we'll try some on you and you can keep whichever one you like the best. So he came around, tried some on, found one that fit, he really liked it, and then the two of them were just having a conversation, just having a catch up after that. And Amari noticed that Kadari seemed a little bit off, a little bit nervous, and so she said, what's wrong? Is something bothering you? And so Kadari just said, look outside. So Amari got up, she looked out of the window, and there she saw a car parked outside her house that she didn't recognise. This was a red car, a red Impala with the headlights on, and she turned back round to Kadari and she said, who's that? He said that that car had been following him the whole way there from the supermarket. It had followed him as he walked all the way there, and he didn't know who it was, and he was scared to leave Amari's house. Now, Amari couldn't actually drive. Her mother could, but her mother, I think, was at work or she was out or something. There was some reason that her mother couldn't drive Kadari home, and so Amari just said, well, I'll walk with you, I'll walk you home and I'll bring my dog. Her dog was apparently quite big. But Kadari declined. He said that he was fine walking home alone. However, it would be on that walk home that Kadari was murdered. Only, like I said, it wasn't on his usual route home. So how had Kadari ended up in this other neighbourhood in Burlington in this alleyway. Either he had gone somewhere else after Amari's house, or maybe he was abducted. Maybe it was related to this red car that was parked outside Amari's waiting for him to leave. And that is where I'm going to leave it for part 1 of this case. I know this seems a little bit short for a first part, however part 2 is going to be quite a bit longer than this one. I just felt like this was a good place to break it off. So thank you so much for watching this one. If you want to watch part 2 in the next couple of days, I promise in the next couple of days, it won't be as long as last time, then make sure you're subscribed with the bell notifications on so you don't miss when I upload. Thanks again to Tennis Clash for sponsoring this video. Remember, if you want to download the game for free, you can go through the link down below in the description of this video. And if you do, you will get a welcome bonus of 2,000 gems and 500 gold to kickstart you in the game. Huge thank you to all of my channel members for helping me decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can just click the join button on a desktop, or there'll be a link in the description of this video. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up down below because that really helps me out. If you want to subscribe, you can click this link right here. If you want to subscribe to my second channel, you can click this link right here. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, there'll be a playlist on the screen right now. Okay, bye!